know the press release went out to all the desks earlier this morning, and what we wanted to do is give some more information, some context, some perspective on this case concerning the arrest of Mario Lobo, 61-year-old guy. I was talking with one of the detectives from Crimes Against Children's Unit. He said that wouldn't be a stretch at all to say that in the duration of your career, very rarely do you come across a serial child molester, and that's exactly who the type of person that's been arrested in this case, and we have to be careful about how much we do say. We'll say this, they don't think it's a stretch at all to consider this person a serial child molester whose crimes may have spanned 4 states up the East Coast, and one of our sergeants, Jim Jones with Crimes Against Children's Unit, he's going to talk a little about that and where we could have potential victims, some of the agencies we're working with, but one of the more interesting things in this whole case, I think, is just the unique MO that this person displayed carrying out this series of crimes. So I don't want to jump too far ahead. I do want to introduce Jim Jones. He's a sergeant with Crimes Against Children's Unit. He's going to kind of unpack this. Gets a little twisty-turny, but he's going to do his best to get it out there, and we got some housekeeping to take care of on the back end. Jim Jones.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning. I'll just start with the arrest of Mario Lobo. With our case, the investigation began in November 13th when our victim disclosed to inappropriate touching by Mr. Lobo, and that opened up the investigation from that point. And from information uncovered by one of my detectives, we now have a concern that there are other victims out there that have also been touched by Mr. Lobo. And we want to reach out to the community for the community safety and make sure that we stop the victimization of any further victims out there. It began November 13th, as I said, when the child disclosed to what happened. And our typical investigations begin with a forensic interview at the Child Advocacy Center. Here locally, it's Pat's Place. Following that and the information divulged by the victim, the detective further investigated and located Mr. Lobo and interviewed him. And from that interview, we got more and more information, which spawned his arrest yesterday. Are there any questions?
Did he admit to the crimes when you guys interrogated and interviewed him and talked to him?
He gave us information that indicated gave us enough information to provide the charges that he was charged with.
So he didn't deny it?
Correct.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about how police became aware of this incident? You said the child came forward, so can you talk about as much as you can about how you became aware that this was going on?
Sure. After the child disclosed to what happened to her, she told her mother. Her mother called 911 and police officers responded. That initiated the investigation. And these kinds of investigations are sensitive. You want to be very sensitive to the victims and the emotional trauma that impacts them. So when we get these types of disclosures, they report it, they document it, and they forward it to us. We specialize in these types of investigations. So like we have the forensic interviewers at Pat's Place that sit down. They're professionals that sit down with the child so as not to re-traumatize them when talking about what happened to them. So from there, we gather more information, and the detectives, find what information they can gather to corroborate what the victim disclosed to us.
If I could, and Sergeant, I'm sorry for overstepping. You indicated that this individual had a unique way of preying on children. Is it something you can get into with the press?
Sure. And this is concerning to us because his typical MO was to become friends and associates, to network and gain the trust of certain members in the Latino community. In these cases that that we're looking at, they were females with young children. So that's alarming, but that's his MO. He would gain their trust through mutual friends, rent a room. He was kind of a transient guy, so he would just come from one place to another. And when he rents the room, he gains their trust. He volunteers to take care of their children, and that's when the assaults occur.
How many potential victims total are you talking about, and are they all in the Charlotte area?
They are not. Right now, we have our initial victim that disclosed and opened up this investigation. We have 2 more locally that we know of, and others spanning 3 other states: Maryland, New York, and Ohio.
How many are there with the other states?
We don't know the exact number of victims. I know there's 2 in Ohio and several in New York, and I don't know the numbers in Maryland. I forget.
When did he move to Charlotte? Did he move to Charlotte recently, or was he allegedly committing those crimes while he was living here?
Well, according to the initial disclosure, the assaults occurred between 2014 and 2015. So it's a delayed disclosure by our initial victim. So he was living, I can't say when he was living in Charlotte, but he was definitely living here between 2014 and 2015.
Do you guys know if he even had a permanent residence or was kind of homeless?
He would rent rooms and he would move from one place to another, so he was kind of transient in that regard, but he did have places where he stayed.
Sorry, excuse me, does he have a criminal history? Is he on the sex offender registry, or are these the first charges of this nature he's facing?
Nothing locally. He was a victim of a lost property. But criminally, there's nothing locally. Nationally, we're still looking into that to make sure, because we have a couple of potential aliases involved attached to him.
So are you actively speaking with police in Ohio, Maryland, New York, and how far back do those crimes go? If this victim here in Charlotte, this happened to her 2014, so then how far back do all these crimes go?
Years and years. This happened 2014 to 2015, and he was just kind of popping around these different states, and we could be looking to decades, because he is 61 years old. He's an older man, so he's been moving around the country and in different places. So it could be years. We just don't have those details.
So was he preying on single mothers specifically? Young, how old were, what kind of age was he targeting? Do you guys know that yet?
We don't. We haven't identified the victims in the other states as of yet. And once we find a location, we will be reaching out to those authorities in those jurisdictions.
Sarge, I guess the logical question would be, are the feds going to get involved here? FBI, are they aware of this involved yet?
There's always a potential where the feds might get involved when you have a perpetrator like this moving across state lines. It falls within their purview, but generally these types of investigations evolve locally in the beginning, and once we build our case, we'll see exactly what the details are and how he moved from state to state, and if that's something that they would look at.
Just a clarification, you said the first victim came forward to talk to you guys in 2013, but these crimes happened in 2014 and 2015?
No, the initial investigation began with our first victim child that came forward recently on November 13th. And she disclosed to these assaults and appropriate touching that occurred in 2014 to 2015.
Okay, I thought you said 2013 about one of the significant moments. Did I miss you? Okay.
I think you said November 13th. Maybe you got confused. Said it was November of 2013.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Sarge, without giving too much away, is it fair to read into this that the victim came forward here back in November? You talked with her, your people talked with her, and then we learned about the potential victims in Ohio, Maryland, and New York after interviewing him? Or did victims there come forward and then did you guys connect the dots? I guess I'm trying to connect the dots between
That's a great question, and it gives me the opportunity to brag a little bit about my detective. The lead detective, Andrew Key, without his skill set in sitting down and interviewing Mr. Lobo, we would not know about any other victims besides the first victim that came forward. All we had was a couple of names of the other local children who were victimized here. But we didn't have addresses or full names or anything like that. Thanks to the skill of Detective Key in talking to this guy, he opened up and gave us these other locations in other states and other victims. So without that, we wouldn't have this, evolving as it has, and which sparked our concern to reach out to the community and make sure that families, can look at this guy and, talk to their kids if they had any exposure to him, because we don't want to victimize any other children.
So he did admit to all these then, by telling you about crimes you commit in other areas. I understand that, right?
Right.
And I'm going to let Sarge go, and there's a couple of things I wanted to thank Sarge. And just FYI, he's a kind of a button-down, unassuming guy, but that's a Detective Key right there. And again, without the work of Detective Key and his skilled investigative techniques and the rapport that he had built with Mr. Lobo, just like Sergeant Jones said, we probably wouldn't even have known about the cases in Maryland, the cases in Ohio, the cases in Suffolk County, New York. So hat tip to Detective Key, just tremendous work. And, I'd like to say that this is a one-off and unique, but, these are the kind of skilled professionals that we have here in this building and 13 other patrol divisions, and they just do tremendous work. A couple of housekeeping things. I know we've gotten a couple of questions concerning mug shots, and I know about the situation that's kind of developing with the county. I think there's some issues right now with obtaining mug shots from the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's website. Just shoot us an email, and we'll work to get you something in the way of some images of Mr. Lobo. And if you could push that. As much information as we have from these other places, and even here in Charlotte, our detectives aren't foolish enough to believe there are other potential victims out there, and a big help in identifying additional victims is pushing that photo out to the community so they could put a face to a name. Again, very unique MO that this guy had undertaken in befriending these families, sometimes through friends, other parties, getting into these rooms, renting these rooms, transient kind of guy, establishing those relationships and volunteering to watch these young girls, and that's when the victimization took place. So go ahead, send us an email, we'll get you those images. Something else on the back end. You'll probably find when you go to the records window that the public report will be there. I want to really caution you here. This isn't the location that's going to be on that report isn't a block number. It's not a span like we usually give you when we're talking about a sex assault victim. Usually we'll give you a block number. This is the specific home. I can't tell you not to go out there and start knocking on doors. Can't tell you not to go out there and start putting cameras on a house. All I do ask is that you let your conscience be your guide and, exercise a little professionalism here. This girl's 12 years old now, been victimized once through something I couldn't even begin to explain how horrific the situation was that she had to experience. The last thing we want to do is have cameras out in front of her house where she had people knocking on her door and re-victimizing this young girl again, or her family. So again, I can't tell you not to do it. I know all of you in the room, and I know that you're all professionals. So maybe just translate that back to your desks when you get your marching orders today. So just something to chew on there. Alex.
Just a clarification, the 3 local victims, are they all 3 different families, 3 different homes?
Yes, that's my understanding. Yes.
The detective mentioned he was transient, but kind of befriending people. Can you guys provide any sort of clarity as to what circles he was running in, or just kind of approaching people at random?
Yeah, I think it was done through parties that they knew in common. I don't think it was strangers that he was approaching, and I don't want. My loose understanding is that he would make connections through parties that knew that party and work to establish a relationship with that third party. Wind up wound up getting himself into these rooms, renting these rooms, and that's when he would volunteer to take care of these young girls, and that's where we have some of the incidents occurring. Sad stuff, people thinking they're doing the right thing and helping somebody that may or may not have been down on his luck, and to have him take advantage of people like this is just, it's disgusting. And, I guess the community can be encouraged that he's in the lockup now, that he's not on the street to victimize anybody else. But good golly, you got to think that, given this guy's track record, given some of the information that he's given Detective Key, that there's got to be more victims out there, and we hope that this exposure will allow people who feel they may have been victimized to come forward and pass that information along. Important stuff.
The sergeant said he was preying on the Latino community.
Yes.
So were all the victims Latino?
That's my understanding. Yes, the three that we've been able to identify here locally, and I know that we're working with Suffolk County Police in New York. That's where some of the other incidents apparently took place, according to some of the information that Lobo gave to our investigators.
What was his occupation?
It's my understanding he's self-employed. I don't know to the extent of what that employment was. I did ask the detectives whether his employment allowed him to further this type of victimization, and he didn't have an indication at this point to suggest that that was the case.
You said one of the girls was 12. How old were the other two?
Don't know. Try to find out for you. She's 12 now.
Yes,
she's 12 now.
How, 8 or 9?
9. Yeah, I'll triple check that as well, but it's my understanding she's 12 years old now. Who else?
You said it was in 3 separate houses, right, Bob?
It's my understanding, yeah. Let me triple check. And I believe you have the one over on Reams, and that was the one that I was kind of alluding to just a couple of seconds ago. Really, I've been there, been on that side, know the pressure of an assignment desk and producers, but this is a kind of tricky territory that we're getting into now, especially when it comes to outing the identity of a child sex assault victim, and that's no type of situation or a lane that any of us want to find ourselves in.
So that address is the very first victim who came forward, who's 12 now. So that's
Yes.
the original, and then we don't know where the other 2 victims are, but
Yeah,
they're somewhere in
and I think they're trying to still determine that. But the one address that you have is the address, and I would do my best not to publish that. I would do my best not to broadcast that. I would certainly do my best not to show up there with a live truck, a microwave truck, or a camera crew and start banging on doors out there. Just probably wouldn't be a good situation for her.
Was he alone? I'm assuming he was the caregiver. Does he assume?
I have no reason to believe he wasn't, Alex.
And
I really think the most important thing is just pushing that information, and we're going to work to get you that image, get that image out there. Again, we're talking Ohio, we're talking Maryland, we're talking New York, and talking here in the Carolinas, and that's just the limited conversation that our detectives have had with it. We don't know how big this thing's going to get, but we're hard pressed to think that there aren't other victims out there, and we want to do anything and everything we can to get them to come forward and feel comfortable in doing that.
is there a minimum number of victims we know right now? Like, are we talking at least 10?
I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't even want to take a stab at that. Nope.
Any idea if he's got family in here?
I don't know. I know originally he's from El Salvador. I don't know. I think he's 61 years old. I don't know what his family situation is here, but I know that he's originally from El Salvador.
You here illegally?
His legal status or his immigration status isn't anything that's relevant to our investigation at all. It's probably something that you'd want to check in with the feds on. But what is it very relevant to our investigation is whether or not there's additional victims out there. So we encourage people to come forward if they know who this guy is, or better yet, if they feel like they or anyone in their family has been victimized by him. Cool? You guys got it?
Okay, bro.
Okay.